Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another reading from Paradise Found, The Cradle of the Human Race at the North Pole by William F. Warren. And today we are reading from Part 4, Chapter 7, The Cradle of the Race in Ancient Egyptian Thought. Before I get started reading this chapter, I want to just make the comment that throughout this book thus far, it has been very evident that the author he was trying very hard to push the narrative that the ancients all thought that the earth was a sphere. And I think that most of us who are at least watching this on my channel realize that that is not the case when it comes to ancient cosmology. But I just wanted to point that out so that you realize that I am just reading what the book says. And these are not my thoughts. These are the thoughts of the author. So let's get started. According to the Camite legend related by Diodorus, Osiris and Isis lived together in Nisa, or Paradise. Here there was a garden wherein the deathless dwelt. Here they lived in perfect happiness, until Osiris was seized with the desire to drink the water of immortality. Then he went forth in search of it and fell. But an earlier couple than Osiris and Isis was Sebek and Ta'urt, who, as the two constellations of the 7 stars revolving round the tree or pole, were the primeval pair in paradise, the natural genesis. The mythical geography of the ancient Egyptians is as yet too little known to allow us to hope for much light from this quarter on the question of the site of Eden. Even their cosmology is little understood, and their scientific attainments are by many inexcusably underestimated. So good a scholar as Mr. Villiers Stewart could recently write, the Egyptians had not attained to a sufficiently advanced point in science to solve the problem of how the sun in his daily course, having sunk behind the western horizon, returned to rise at the opposite quarter of the heavens. Nevertheless, as we desire to test our hypothesis as far as possible by all most ancient traditions and myths, whether favorable or unfavorable, we must inquire whether anything can be ascertained as to the ideas of the ancient Egyptians touching the form of the earth and the theater of man's first history. The leading features of Egyptian cosmology, as interpreted by the present writer, are in perfect accord with the cosmological ideas of other ancient nations, as described in Chapter 1 of the present division. They may be briefly expressed in the 6 following theses. 1. That in ancient Egyptian thought the earth was conceived of as a sphere, with its axis perpendicular and its north pole at the top. 2. That in the earliest time Amenti was conceived of neither as a cavern in the bowels of the earth, nor as a region of the earth to the west, on the same general plane as the land of Egypt, but was simply the under or southern hemisphere of the earth, conceived of as just described. 3. That the Tat pillar symbolized the axis of the world, heaven and earth, upright in space. 4. That Ta neuter, whatever its later applications, originally signified the extreme northern or topmost point of the globe, where earth and heaven were fabled to meet. 5. That Cher neuter was the inferior celestial hemisphere underarching Amenti. And 6. That Hes and Nebta, Isis and Nephthys, were respectively goddesses of the north and south poles, or of the northern and southern heavens. Assuming now, with Chabas, Lieblein, Lefevre, and Ebers, that the earth of the ancient Egyptians, like that of the ancient Asiatic nations, was spherical, what was their conception of its northern terminus? In Chapter 1 of this part, some indication has been already given, but our present investigation demands a fuller answer to this question. Turning to the great work of Brugsch on the geographical inscriptions of the old Egyptian monuments, we find that the Egyptians considered the farthest limit in the north to be the 4 pillars or supports of heaven. The fact that these 4 supports of heaven, instead of being situated in 4 opposite directions from Egypt, are all in the farthest north, is very significant. It shows that though the people might speak of heaven as supported on 4 pillars, it is not to be inferred therefrom that they conceived of the earth as flat, and of the sky as a flat oriental roof 1 story above it. Brugsch himself, though writing upon the supposition that the Egyptians' earth was flat, avoids this mistake. His inference, coming from one who had a traditional wrong theory to support, is most interesting and valuable. He says, "Inasmuch as these 4 supports of heaven, the northern limit of the earth as known to the Egyptians, nowhere else occur as name of people, land, or river, it seems to be most probable that we have herein the designation of a high mountain, which was perhaps characterized by 4 peaks, or which consisted of 4 ranges, from which peculiarity it received its name. Like all peoples of antiquity, at least all those whose literature has come down to us, the Egyptians conceived of the earth as rising toward the north, so that at last at its northernmost point it joined the sky and supported it." In the Buddhist conception of Meru, as given in chapter 1 of this part, we have precisely the 4-peaked heaven-supporting mountain, which Brugsch here describes. Each of the 4 corners of the mountain top has a peak 700 yojanas high. It is not impossible that in the 4 dwarfs which support the dome of the modern Buddhist temple, we have a far-off survival of ancient Egypt's 4 supports of heaven. Certainly, the Buddhist temple roofs symbolize the circumpolar heaven, and a recent author, touching upon the latter's mythological support, writes as follows: "This prop passing through the earth and the heavens at the pole, indicated, as we have seen by the Alpha of Draco, became the nail of the old astronomers, the point round which all nature revolved. Between earth and the celestial pole, the prop idea was again brought forward in the central column of a huge conical mountain, Mount Meru, guarded at each cardinal point by a mighty king. The 4 dwarfs propping up some of the columns in the old Buddhist temples are evidently these 4 kings. When the prop pierced the highest heaven, it was a spire called the Ti, and in Nepal it is confessedly in all the temples the symbol of Adi Buddha, the Supreme, in his heavenly garden, Nandana Grove." But returning from this merely curious question, we remind ourselves that we have seen reason to believe that the ancient Egyptians conceived of the earth as a sphere, with a heaven-supporting mountain in the extreme north. In the extreme south was another mountain, the Horn of the World, represented as of incredible height, 8 atur or stadia. This corresponds so perfectly with the earth of the Puranas, with its Sumeru and Kumeru, that we are irresistibly impelled to inquire whether the parallelism extends any further. We take the question of the direction of the abode of the dead. All agree that in Indian thought the abode of the dead is in the south. So was it in the thought of the ancient Egyptian. The recently discovered epitaph of Queen Isis Keb, mother-in-law of Shishak, king of Assyria, circa 1000 BC, thus reads: "She is seated all beautiful in her place enthroned. Among the gods of the south she is crowned with flowers. She is seated in her beauty in the arms of Khonsu, her father, fulfilling his desires. He is in Amenti, the place of departed spirits." Again, in the mythological earth of India, the abode of the dead, being the southern or under hemisphere, is looked upon as inverted. Viewed from the standpoint of gods and men, it is bottom upward, and its inhabitants move about head downward. The same is true of Amenti, the Egyptian underworld, and of its inhabitants. Again, in Hindu thought, all deadly influences proceed from the south, the abode of death, all beneficent and life-giving influences from the north. The same is true in ancient Egyptian thought. It is curious, says the English editor of Lenormand's Chaldean Magic, it is curious that in Egypt all good and healing and life proceeded from the west, the land of the setting sun, and all evil from the east, the land of its rising. The statement is curiously incorrect. The north is the sacred quarter, and from the north come life and blessing. The north wind is the very breath of God. It proceeds from the nostrils of Khnum and enlivens all creatures. It is one of the high prerogatives of the blessed dead to breathe the delicious air of the north wind. That they may breathe it is the prayer of bereaved affection. The fields of peace are at the north of the fields of Sanhemu. There is the proper home of the great god of whom the Nile poet sang. There is no building that can contain him. There is no counselor in thy heart. Thy youth delight in thee, thy children. Thou directest them as king. Thy law is established in the whole land, in the presence of thy servants in the north. Of the same God it is said, He createth all works therein, all writings, all sacred words, all his implements in the north. As yet no texts have been discovered which represent the earliest Egyptian ideas of the origin of man and the location of his birthplace. One proof, however, that man was conceived of as having proceeded from the land of the gods in the north appears in connection with the myth of the reign of Ra. In Egyptian mythology, the reign of Ra was like the primeval reign of Kronos. The myth of it was a reminiscence of the sinless golden age. But in those primeval and perfect days, men still dwelt in the country of the gods, which country, as we have seen, was in the highest north. And because they still occupied the heaven-touching mountain, the rebellion by which they forfeited their estate of blessedness is expressly described as on the mountain, an object not easily found in Egypt. The same teaching is further supported by the language of certain scholars, who, without any particular theory as to the location of Eden, have held that the hieroglyph used in Egyptian texts as the determinative prefix to names designating civilized lands is simply a pictorial symbol of primitive Eden, divided by its fourfold river. A writer in the Edinburgh Review, said to be Mr. Walter Wilkins, remarks, "The Buddhists and Brahmins, who together constitute nearly half the population of the world, tell us that the decussated figure of the cross," whether in a simple or complex form, symbolizes the traditional happy abode of their primeval ancestors, the paradise of Eden toward the east, as we find it expressed in the Hebrew. And let us ask, what better picture or more significant characters in the complicated alphabet of symbolism could have been selected for the purpose than a circle and a cross? The one to denote a region of absolute purity and perpetual felicity, the other those four perennial streams that divided and watered the several quarters of it. Mr. Wilkins claims that in the Egyptian hieroglyph above given we have the same symbol as the Indian swastika. It was therefore primeval paradise, which was commemorated by the sacred circular cakes of the Egyptians, composed of the richest materials, of flour, of honey, of milk, and which the serpent and bull, as well as the other reptiles and beasts consecrated to the service of Isis and their higher divinities, were daily fed, and which upon certain festivals were eaten with extraordinary ceremony by the people and their priests. He continues, "The cross cake," says Sir Gardner Wilkinson, "was their hieroglyph for civilized land, obviously a land superior to their own, as it was indeed to all mundane territories. For it was that distant traditional country of sempiternal contentment and repose, of exquisite delight and serenity, where nature, unassisted by man, produces all that is necessary for his sustentation." This, says Donnelly, though arguing in favor of a mid-Atlantic island Eden, this was the Garden of Eden of our race. In the midst of it was a sacred and glorious eminence, the umbilicus orbis terrarum, toward which the heathen in all parts of the world and in all ages turned a wistful gaze in every act of devotion, and to which they hoped to be admitted, or rather to be restored, at the close of this transitory scene. In Part 5th, Chapter 4th, it will be shown that the umbilicus orbis terrarum is indisputably the terrestrial pole. Finally, if, as Plato represents, the story of lost Atlantis was received from Egypt and constituted a part of the priestly teaching of the dwellers upon the Nile, our next chapter will present us further evidence that the Eden and the antediluvian worlds of ancient Egyptian tradition were precisely where the traditions of other ancient peoples placed them, to wit, in the land of sacred memories in the far-off, fairy north. That is the end of this chapter. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to support my channel, I will leave a link in the description box to my channel membership page, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.